Okay, thank you to Sam for inviting me for this talk. It's like really exciting to be here because I've heard quite a lot about the group. So my presentation today is going to be on exploring objects of queer significance at Nottingham Castle. So I'll probably start off with a little bit of a tangent about my research and kind of some of the theories and methodologies that I've been working on. And then we'll get into some of the interesting stuff, which is kind of the objects and kind of stories that we found there and ways that you might be able to find stories at different sites or at the castle, or if you kind of want to see what's on display and how it's been presented at the moment as well. So to begin, I'm funded by Midlands Four Cities, and I was previously on a collaborative doctoral award with Nottingham Castle, and this was prior to the liquidation in 2022 in that November. So my thesis is entitled Opening the Gates, Increasing Opportunities for the Representation of Gender and LGBTQI+ in Castle Histories. And this explores how we can find and interpret gender and LGBT stories at castle sites and how these stories can be presented to visitors. So the project, as I said, was originally in collaboration with Nottingham Castle, but after the Trust's liquidation in November 2022, the CDA was dissolved, but then I still maintained links with the site when they reopened in 2023, which coincidentally is actually how I found myself here. And then because I completed a placement with them in 2024. So it's just important to note that even though I'm talking about the castle and some of the archives and all these things, I'm not a spokesperson or associate of Nottingham Castle. I was on a former project with them and I was on a placement that has now ended. So much of what will be discussed today relates to the placements and the projects that I've completed with the site, both before and after the liquidation of the trust. And my research crosses the divide between museum and castle studies, and I use both gender and queer theory to discover the ways of presenting LGBT histories to visitors. So to start the project, start the presentation, it's probably best that I talk about my methodology and some of the reasons as to like how my methodologies have been developed, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those methodologies are in a minute. But essentially, I study emotions and how it relates to museum visitors, and this was prompted by a project undertaken with Nottingham Castle Trust in April 2022, and this was called Souls. So this project consisted of 4 roaming tours, which led visitors across the castle site to visit 5 LGBTQI+ characters whose lives were connected to the castle or city of Nottingham. And the project was a collaboration between students and staff within Nottingham Trent University's School of Art and Design, School of Art and Humanities, Nottingham Castle, and actors from the Nottinghamshire LGBTQI+ community. So the project was overseen by Dr. Andrea Montoya of the School of Art and Design, with students from the school designing and devising costumes and stories for the chosen characters. Historical research was explored by myself, which involved researching queer figures and events associated with Nottingham and presenting these to the students within their seminars. So the students weren't limited to the selected figures that I picked out, and they were encouraged to pursue their own research around the topic, which some of them did. So the Hercules character that you'll see on the far left, that was picked and researched by Ivy. So the 5 selected characters were Edward II, Margaret Cavendish, Hercules, Sir William Neville, and Ursula from D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow. It might be confusing why you might have a character like Hercules, or kind of D.H. Lawrence like associated with Nottingham Castle, but essentially we wanted to have a broadest range as possible. So because Nottingham Castle is an art gallery, it does have some paintings of like Hercules, and it has a classical art collection as well. So that's kind of where those things have come from. And we expanded the range of people that we could look at. So because D.H. Lawrence is a figure associated with Nottingham, that's why he was included. Margaret Cavendish also isn't really a figure that, I would say is like, she's not necessarily queer herself. I think it might be safe to assume that she was straight, but the way her story is and who she is as a person is very queer coded, and she's very camp. So that's why she was included as well, just to make sure that we had more women and like female characters involved in the project, because that was one of the difficulties in trying to pick characters. So the characters were performed by members of the local LGBTQI plus community after an open call for LGBT identifying actors was advertised. A leaflet outlining the roaming tour route and biographies for the characters was devised and distributed to audience members at the ticket desk prior to the start of the performances. The Souls Heritage Design Project sought to measure the impact of research-led site-specific performance at Nottingham Castle, and it specifically aimed to explore if site-specific performance is beneficial to the portrayal of queer histories within the heritage site, and how audience members reacted to both the characters and the space itself. So I'm going to try and show the video, because I could talk about this all day, but one of the students put together some interviews for the project, and they explain it far, far better than I ever will be able to. So if this doesn't work, Sam, if you could speak up, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm Cami, and I'm the designer who made the costume. I'm James, and I'm the actor. So the design is meant to be about King Edward II. I really wanted to send the idea of entrapment and how it probably felt for him to feel these things and have these desires, but not being able to fully show them to the people he loved. So because of the royalty and how things worked back then, he had to keep that for himself. So that's pretty much what the headpiece and the whole costume is trying to transmit. For me, I'm trans, I'm gay, and I've lived my whole life feeling like I had to hide parts of who I am, even though, I came from a very accepting family. And so I understand how Edward feels about having to hide certain parts of himself. And so I think that part of the story really resonates with me.
I'm Romy Emma Tate, and I'm the designer.
I'm Grande Patago, and I'm the actor.
This is a costume that I've designed for Margaret Cavendish. She's a writer, she's a massive writer, so we've gone for writing and as much inkiness and text on her, and she's got this ink dripping out of her hands as stylistically as we could do indoors. She was a royalist. So we've given her a cavalier's hat just because it is who she was as a person, and I think along with these big combat boots and big trousers with more writing on them, because it's a more masculine aspect of her.
She was blurring lines between gender and stuff, She's obviously doing both. But yeah, she sounded like, she was doing everything basically at the time what she wasn't supposed to do with none of these things.
She's very opinionated.
My name's Ivy Richards. I'm an NTU theatre design student in my third year. So my design is about Heracles and a story of him and Queen Omphale, where he was given to her as a slave for a year and was made to wear women's clothes and do women's chores, and after that year they married. As a trans woman and an ancient Greek fanatic, the story was really interesting to me. I've always found it calling towards ancient Greece and their stories, and a story about what we know as the most masculine man of history, wearing women's clothes and being okay with that, and having a fluidness to his sexuality and gender is really interesting. And it's something that I think we all could do with learning a bit more about these queer characters in history.
I'm Lucy. I'm a theatre design student, third year.
And my name is Lee. I'm a graduate.
This story is William Neville, who was a constable knight at this Nottingham Castle. And the design idea is the shield, which is an imperial shield, which was on their tomb. This is William Neville's, and this is his lover, John Campbell. And then this is a chest plate. And then underneath is the reveal of the tomb, as it wasn't usual unless you were married at the time period. And then mesh armour for the shoulder and back.
I think the historic connection between William Neville and Nottingham Castle, historically documenting that culture, is very important.
Okay, so I'm Cinder Smith.
And I'm Rachel Ross.
And the character for this performance is Ursula Brangwen from D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow, book from 1915, where one of the characters experiences a same-sex relationship with a teacher.
And I was drawn to the project after answering the open call for interview looking for actors. And then I met Cinder, and then I read The Rainbow, and it really intrigued me on how the relationships kind of mirror today, even though this was written in 1915, and some of the struggles still exist.
Okay, so hopefully you've got more of a sense of what that project was about based on the students' words. So I'm just going to come back in and show the full screen. Okay, right, that should be working now. If it doesn't come up, please let me know. So as you can see, one of the overwhelming responses to the project was really like the emotive language that was picked up within the questionnaires, and that was used by the attendees who were filling them out. So much of this language directly translated into calls for revisits or for similar events to be organised by the site, and it strongly indicated that emotion could be harnessed as a tool for heritage sites to utilise and potentially encourage further visits. So some of the theories that I've been researching and coming out of this, one of them is queer time. So theories of queer time question the ways in which heteronormativity frames and disciplines time. So it calls for a reconsideration of how cultural expectations of maturation, which is the idea of like marriage, children, etc., are defined and produced. So queer time is usually explored through a sociological or contemporary history lens, with culture and societal expectations being scrutinised and redefined. So Halberstam describes queer time and space as developing in opposition to family, heterosexuality and reproduction. They argue that homosexuality has the potential to open up new life narratives and alternative relations to time and space. Dinshaw is one of the few historians who examines queer temporality in relation to the medieval world. And they theorise that queerness has a temporal dimension and focuses on the asynchronarity of time, specifically the multiplicities contained within the now. So Dinshaw argues that the past allows the possibility of touching across time and then collapsing time through effective contact between marginalised people now and then. So queer theory can have really interesting ramifications for heritage sites. So if heterosexual time is neat and linear, documenting life from conception through to marriage, children and death, then homosexual time is messy and multiplicitous, free from the constraints of social convention and expectation. So we can map this analogy onto the temporality of heritage sites. So when you arrive at a castle site, you are often greeted with a timeline of the history of the site. So for some sites, the entire castle visitor route may become mapped out in this way. This means that the history of the site that is communicated may be reduced to key historical events that can be mapped onto this timeline. For example, you might think of battle dates, sieges, kingly visits. This reduces the history of the castle to a patriarchal and militaristic lens, and gendered and queer histories may become mapped onto this existing timeline, but they are overshadowed by the key dates that linger as focus points for visitor viewing. So if we view objects, histories, and stories as artifacts that can induce a contact point through time, it warps time and forces the visitor to think outside of the chronology. And this is helpful when we recognise the multiple ongoing and competing narratives that exist within the artefact, and which may not conform to a heterosexual imagining of the castle site. It allows us to think of the competing layers of historical time. So, trans-inclusive culture was launched by the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries at the University of Leicester in September 2023. And just like as a side note on it, it's a really quite amazing guide. And if you work in like museums like or heritage, I really do think it is something worth reading, because it has scenarios for different situations, and it kind of like goes beyond the archive and looks at museums like more holistically as well. So it sets out an ethical framework to support cultural organisations to advance trans inclusion. And this comprehensive guide donates public sector equality duty, ethical frameworks for trans inclusion, and scenarios that sector workers might face within their museums. So most relevant to my research are the solutions to the question, how can we develop trans-inclusive displays, events, and public programming? So the guide calls for a prioritisation of positive and joyful stories that are affirming for trans visitors and enriching for all visitors. So these words, affirming and enriching, are reminiscent of Packer's research into the benefits of museum experiences. By mapping qualitative data from visitors against a satisfying experiences framework developed by Peter Rick-Doing and Carnes, they identified that psychological well-being became a key benefit for visitors. So Packer's definition of psychological well-being encompassed feeling personal growth, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. With object experiences, visitors are satisfied by seeing the real thing or valuable things and can be moved by beauty. Cognitive experiences relate to the educational function of the museum site, where a visitor is satisfied with enriching their understanding of a subject. Introspective experiences are satisfying to the visitor when they can imagine other times or places, reflect on meaning, and feel a sense of belonging. And social experiences relate to how the visitor receives enjoyment from spending time with family and friends within the museum space. Through an analysis of the Smithsonian museums in America, the introspective experiences were found to be more closely associated with historical museum and heritage spaces. And what is interesting about Packer's study is that introspective experiences did not occur independent of object and cognitive experiences. And this can illustrate how queer temporality is already being utilised by visitors within museum spaces through a suspension of time that allows them to connect the past with the present through the objects that they are receiving. So throughout my research, and what ended up like informing my placement and came out of the back of that SOLS project, was this idea of empathy and the empathetic visitor. So who is the empathetic visitor? I define the empathetic visitor as one who is affected by these contact points through time and is moved emotionally. Within the visitor surveys for the SOLS project, roughly half of the audience members used emotive language to describe the performances. There were also calls for revisits, with one audience member specifically stating that they would love to see more or something like this again. This underlines why the empathetic visitor is one that we should be engaging with. The evidence indicates that emotion could be a tool for promoting revisits. When visitors engage in the temporality of the site and feel connected to the distant past, the lasting impression is beyond the educational. This is evidenced within the feedback wall at Queer Britain. So visitors to the museum are encouraged to write or draw on hexagonal magnets that link together around a leading question. For example, why is it important for LGBTQI+ people to be seen? And the comments are extremely emotive, and they leave a lasting impression with visitors. Other visitors that I've spoken to informally do comment on their impressions of the wall, and they have these impressions as well have started to be captured on social media. So they have so many people write things. If you've ever been to Queer Britain, if you've been multiple times, you'll see it's constantly changing because loads of people just want to contribute to the wall and there isn't enough space. So they do document them as well. And I think they might be in the archives, but they put them up on social media as a marketing tool as well for visitors. And I think after speaking to some of the staff there, originally the questions were supposed to change to have different prompts, but this question seemed to be so significant and important to people visiting the museum that I don't think it's ever been changed, not to my knowledge anyway, and I've been quite a few times. So as you can see, empathy and emotion are connected to queer time, but not because it has the power to change opinion, but because it has the power to affirm. And it's possible that we can use empathy as a tool for queering medieval artefacts, as well as increasing the possibility for revisits. So on to more of the kind of artifact side of things. This is a case study of, this is one of the objects that I looked at but didn't quite make it into the placement in the end. But I'll talk about what came out of the placement after this section. But from March to September 2024, I was on placement at Nottingham Castle, researching queer stories within their collection. And Nottingham Castle's collection is largely devoted to items received from 1878 after becoming the first municipal art museum in the country. It does retain some items donated from the city residents, and this is one of these donations. So it is a doorway of carved oak, which is believed to be dated from the Elizabethan era, although I think they're still waiting to get feedback on when the wood is actually dated. And it was formerly situated on Bottle Lane in Nottingham, a premise known locally as King John's Palace. And the doorway featured two carved figures with male faces and breasts. And the carving on the spandrel is more difficult to discern. I think it's kind of looks like a mermaid. Like you can kind of see, maybe this is like a bit of a tail. I think mermaids in the past were depicted kind of two like tail-like legs, but everyone I've spoken to has like a different opinion on what this is. Yeah, it's definitely some kind of humanoid creature. So Reverend Orange's 1840 historical text associates the site to a former court of King John, and the document recounts how a local butcher who resides in the building where the doorway was installed claimed that the site was locally known as King John's Palace. It's because of the nature of the source, I've been unable to access the fidelity of this statement. It's possible it's confused with the actual King John Palace, even though King John only spent 9 days there, but that's located in Clipstone in northwest Nottinghamshire. I've spoken to a couple of archaeologists. Some of them think they're referring to a pub. So there was a pub in that area known as that as well. So it could be that it actually wasn't even situated on Bottle Lane and it was a different lane. But it definitely seemed to come from that Lace Market area. But eventually it was removed and installed in the castle before the restoration. And it was situated between two historical exhibits. So if you ever went to Nottingham Castle before the kind of £3 million restoration, the way it is now, there was a split. If you go into where the Rebellion Gallery is today, that used to be a split leveled. So this was what the split level looked like. And then there was no kind of annotations or description. It was just kind of put up as a nice decorative object between these two exhibits because it seems to kind of link this. This is the early form of the Rebellion Gallery behind, and then this is kind of like the Nottingham history. So you can see like the alabaster over here as well. That's quite central to their collection. So that's kind of where it was situated before. After the restoration, it wasn't stored here and didn't get featured as an object on display. So many staff members today don't even realise the artefact is there because it is in storage now. So you'll only see it if you manage to go on like an archival trip to the storage facilities. And the Nottingham Castle itself, as I said, underwent a £30 million restoration in 2018 and reopened in 2021. And that's kind of where it resides now in the stores. So a drawing of the door frame in this book by Reverend Orange that I mentioned from 1840. In this drawing, the description of the figures are highly feminized, being described as grotesque female figures resembling the Egyptian Sphinx. And without the preservation of the door frame in the castle's collection, the masculine elements of the carving may have been erased from history. So Anne, who's one of the social history curators at the castle site, was the one who linked these together. So she saw the carvings that they had in the collection, and she did some research. She remembered this page from this book and put two and two together. And to me, I think even though this is a very highly feminized figure, I think it is safe to say that this probably is the same door. It's too similar for it not to be. So that was quite an exciting find by staff. So looking at the carvings and the drawings and information provided by Reverend Orange, think to yourself, how does this door frame make you feel? Do you feel surprised, affirmed, intrigued? What is your interpretation of the figures? Why are they both masculine and feminine? And do you think they are Egyptian sphinxes, like Reverend Orange thinks? Do you think there's something else? Does your prior knowledge or experiences affect how you view the carvings? So for me, the carvings feel inherently queer. The liminal space of the doorway speaks to an element of transness within the carvings, as these are bodies on display which are in a state of transformation, and they contain multiplicities which do not conform to gendered expectation. So Reverend Orange's feminization of the carvings through his drawings and texts also have resonances with this queer historical experience. It is a stark reminder of the erasure of queer history from historical record, but also speaks to our current political situation and the misgendering faced by trans people in the UK today, and actually in America as well, because the situation has definitely deepened and worsened over there since even this script was written. So to view this carving today is to collapse time and ruminate on the competing layers of history. And the intention of these carvings was probably not to speak to the queer experience, but through emotion and empathy, the modern viewer can find these resonances through time. So through these resonances, visitor satisfaction may be achieved through an introspective experience that creates a sense of belonging and affinity to the past. So I know that they're currently at the moment, like the social history creator is trying to increase the access and awareness of these objects within the stores. There's been some ideas maybe for like a poetry event, inviting members to like think and ruminate on these carvings. So it'll be interesting to see, what the castle might come up next and what projects they might have in store in the future. So these ideas offer innovative ways to communicate with LGBT audiences whilst opening access to the castle's collection. So my question is, what impact can our emotions have on our understanding of historical artifacts? And can emotions bridge the gap between the past and the present to bring forth new queer meaning? So for the final segment, I'll talk briefly on the Nottingham Castle placement that I did and the audio tour, which is now available on the Bloomberg Connects app. So if you have the app, if you search for Nottingham Castle, you'll be able to find this audio tour that's on there. If you don't have the app, please download it. It's a fantastic resource. It's free, and any museum, it'll be free for any museum that's on there as well, and you can access it from all over the world. So you could look at what's going on in like the London museums, while sitting from home. You could, if you don't go to Nottingham, or you can't access the site for whatever reason, you can still access the audio tour through the app there. So it's just a fantastic resource that it doesn't get enough attention. But yeah, please download the Bloomberg Connects app if you take nothing else from this. So from March to September 2024, I undertook a part-time placement at Nottingham Castle, and this developed into this kind of walking audio tour titled Nottingham Castle's LGBTQI+ Lives and Lovers, as I said, which is on the app. So this audio tour follows the stories of 4 paintings within the long gallery, which all contain LGBTQI+ themes related to the artist or the story within. So Nottingham Castle Museum is unusual because it functions more as an art gallery than a kind of castle site. The actual castle has been demolished twice in its history, so the building that's there today is more of a ducal palace. The spotlight talks within the long gallery features regular programming, which is free to annual pass guests, and this coincidentally is the majority as an annual pass does cost the same as a day entry. So most people will just buy the annual pass, on the off chance that they might come again if they're visiting, or if you live locally, it's it's a great pass to have. So we decided to focus the research within this space for this reason, because there was precedent there. So much of the historical talks that are connected to the site, such as the cave tours that you might be aware of to Mortimer's Hole, and the medieval history talks, they're usually promoted as an additional paid ticket. And I didn't want the LGBT talk to be paid, just for ethical reasons. Therefore, the artwork tour suited the site better in this instance. But it was interesting because focusing on the artwork rather than ephemeral stories connected to the site did make researching and planning the tour easier, as visitors have tangible objects to connect with. It also made the tour route a lot more accessible, as there is access to the long gallery via the lift, and the tour would be unaffected by bad weather. So another idea for the tour was there's visitor interpretation panels that are outside that talk about the history of the site, but they're currently not linked up at the moment. So you can go and peruse, and they're really interesting. They can give you snapshots of what the original castle used to look like, but there isn't a planned route at the moment. But if we were to do that, then if it was raining, you wouldn't be able to do it. So this offered a lot more opportunity and access. So the Bloomberg Connects app also lends itself to objects, as you can pin objects directly onto a site map and easily create a route through a numbering system. And the app can be accessed off-site, which means the tour is free to access for visitors who cannot physically enter the castle. So surprisingly, there were many LGBT stories that became rediscovered during the research process, and as such it was shortened to the 4 objects on the screen. So the highlight for me was the rediscovery of the Lovers Bowl, and this was a bowl that was commissioned by Nottingham Castle staff in the 90s for a former colleague who passed away during the AIDS crisis. His partner, who also worked for the site, left a really beautiful, touching note detailing their relationship and why the bowl was commissioned. And this was previously only really accessible in the private catalogue description. So members of the public, couldn't read this. I think before the restoration of the site, there was some descriptors in some of the galleries. So if you've been to the castle during that time, you might remember that. But for a long time, that hasn't been accessible. And the bowl was currently in situ in Lord Byron's bedroom at Newstead Abbey. And then because of this project, we were able to have it reinstalled back in its home at Nottingham Castle. So you'll often hear me using the term rediscovered, and that's for me to describing the research process, because most of these LGBT stories behind these artworks were already known within staff networks. So some of this knowledge came from former staff members who previously worked at the site in the 90s and the early noughties. And this knowledge has been lost to current members of staff. It's not a unique case for Nottingham Castle that this happens. I think it's probably happened more frequently there because of the liquidation. It was closed for several years with the restoration, then it got closed again with the liquidation, and many of the staff who were working there did not come back. So because of that, there hasn't really been this retention of information. And this is such a frequent occurrence that it just demonstrates there needs to be a method for retaining this information within the site's network for future staff members, and indeed for kind of similar heritage sites across the UK as well. So other pieces of knowledge were compounded by just a lack of confidence in proof that these were LGBT histories and stories. So the hibiscus flower, which is this final painting, was heavily debated among members of staff as to whether the artist William Rankin was gay. And after the castle reopened in 2022, explicit references to the suggestion that Rankin was homosexual was removed from the painting's description. There are subtle inferences that were left in its place, but this overt suggestion that he was homosexual was removed, and it was just it was for no bad reason, but it was just kind of like anxieties around is this truthful, can we describe, is it historical to describe this person in this way. But ironically, after doing some research, I discovered that it's not only possible that William Rankin, who was the artist of the painting, was gay, but his sister probably was too. And they and the sister was the one who donated the painting as well. So there's some really interesting stories like that was going on behind that as well. So it just shows that there's often a lack of confidence, and a high burden of proof is often is what is needed. For staff in general to feel comfortable even just suggesting an LGBT connection, and this tends to be replaced with tentative language and suggestion, and this is acceptable. But we just need to be more comfortable in not having definite answers for these stories, as the nature of history and the way LGBT history survives has just made this nearly impossible, with the lack of surviving evidence, to have definite answers anyway. Something that you will notice is these are all by men, all of these paintings, and they're all by white men. And that was kind of just, apart from the bowl, actually, the bowl was, it's a story about two male lovers, and there's different sexualities on there, and that was produced by Karen Atherley, but the rest of them are all kind of white by men, and that seems to dominate the narratives. And that was kind of what was available, what we had to work with within that time frame. And if I had, more opportunity and more time, I would definitely be looking to expand on that and include more histories and stories of like artists and people from different cultures as well. So yeah, if you want to see the tour, you can learn more about these, the history behind these paintings, and the bowl, and that's all on the Bloomberg Connects app. And there is a transcript as well. So if you don't like listening to it, you can just read the transcript. So to conclude, I hope I've shown how theories of queer temporality has been instrumental in articulating how emotions can transcend time, and how temporality could be framed within a heritage space. Some things that, if you want to think about, if you're ever at the castle, or if you're visiting heritage sites, like across the UK or the world, think about how these objects make you feel and why that is. Particularly, if you do identify as part of the queer community, there's a fantastic resource that I should have put up by someone called Margaret Middleton. They have a booklet called Looking for Queer Possibility in Museum Spaces. They talk a lot about they call it lavender lenses and using your gaydar, and it kind of talks a lot about this, about how you feel and why that's valid and why that's important. Look for clues and signs. Is what language is this? A long time bachelor that they're talking about? Were they roommates? Is the kind of lavender, symbols within the painting, all these things, they might point to, objects of queer significance as well. And I think most importantly, particularly if you work in these spaces, or, if you're looking to put together like an exhibition or an audio tour or anything like that, just be vocal and confident. You don't have to be certain. I think there's a lot of pressure that we have to be certain and correct, and people don't want to misgender or out, people, through time. I think there's often fears that you'll get backlash from family, who might be surviving today. But often I think the suggestion of queerness is enough. So, have confidence in kind of what you found. Like, this hasn't come from nowhere. There's a reason why you might think this is like an object of queer significance. So just be vocal and have confidence in the objects and stories that you're looking at, and if it makes you feel a certain way, then that's just as valid as well. So that concludes the talk. These are my contact details. I'm not as active on Twitter anymore, but that's my email address if you ever need to get in contact. Thank you.